every Super Mario game, or the final boss of every Super Mario game, or speedrun marathon of every Super Mario game. While you do occasionally find a video that's actually trying to be a comprehensive documentation of the entire franchise, most of the time these videos are using Super Mario games to refer to games in one specific series, the series of games that include Super Mario Bros. And its sequels. And yet, there is no consensus at all for which games actually are part of this series. In fact, let's take a quick look at some of these videos and compare which games they include. In 2020, speedrunner Cosmic tried the Mainline Mario Marathon, where he speedran every mainline Super Mario game in under 24 hours. His itinerary for the marathon consisted of these 18 games, which should look pretty familiar to those of you who've seen my previous video about this subject. Worth noting, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe for the Switch is included here and not New Super Mario Bros. U for the Wii U, which I'm pretty sure is just because Cosmic considers these two titles to be the same game and the Switch version is better for speedrunning. The same list in a slightly different form is also used for Copycat's video The Worst Glitches in Every Super Mario Game, from later that same year. Copycat lists these games in something that resembles but isn't exactly the same as their international release order, and uses an interesting convention for referring to the 4 New Super Mario Bros. Games.
Which was New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo DS, New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Wii, New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS, New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Wii U.
One fun one is this 2018 video by musician Family Jewels titled The Super Mario Super Medley, a collaborative musical tribute to the history of Mario Family Jewels. This collaborative medley includes music from the same 18 games listed by those other 2 videos, including a couple games that straight up don't have any original music. Like, sure, you can tell me that's Jack Stilms doing a piano rendition of the ending theme from Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, but I know that's really an extended version of the ending theme from Mario 1 that was used in the arcade game Versus Super Mario Bros. First. You can't trick me, team of 70 musicians. Anyway, yeah, in addition to these 18 games, this video also includes New Super Luigi U, which is a fun choice. In the 2023 video, How Fast Can You Touch a Koopa in Every Mario Game, YouTuber Jorts extends the familiar list without New Super Luigi U to include Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which had recently been released at the time this video was posted, as well as Bowser's Fury, the new side game included in the Switch port of Super Mario 3D World. Earlier that same year, the channel Switch Stop posted a ranking of every mainline Mario game, which includes the same games as Jorts' video, but excluding Wonder as that game hadn't been released yet at the time. However, very interestingly, this video also contains an explanation of what games are included in the ranking, and this explanation indicates that the writers for Switch Stop consider the games ranked in this video to be a subset of the Super Mario series. Like, the first requirement they give for a game's inclusion in the ranking is that it has to be part of the Super Mario series, but like, they keep saying things after that. Super Mario Run and the Maker games aren't excluded for not being part of the series, but because it didn't make sense to include them in this specific video. So yeah, that's fun. Anyway, there's this video by Jeremy Klinger called Ranking How Useless Peach Is in Every Mario Game, with a thumbnail that seems to suggest that Jeremy here considers the 2023 animated Mario movie to count as a Mario game. The actual video doesn't include it though. Jeremy actually goes out of his way to mention every game he considers mainline, including games that don't even have Peach in them. Thanks, Jeremy. The main highlights of this particular list are Yoshi's Island, Super Mario Run, and Super Mario 64 DS. Since he mentioned 64 DS but none of the other remakes, I kinda have to assume that this guy considers this specific remake to count as its own distinct entry in the series. Neat. On the subject of lists that include some but not all remakes, this video by Boss Runner called Evolution of Final Bosses in Super Mario Games 1985 to 2024, posted shortly after Super Mario Bros. Wonder was released, has clips of the final bosses in 24 Mario games, including Super Mario Run, some but not all remakes of previous Super Mario games, and Super Mario Maker 2, but neither of the other Maker games. Of course, if you're looking for a list that includes Super Mario Maker for Nintendo 3DS, you'll have to watch Game Maker's Toolkit's video, Super Mario's Invisible Difficulty Settings, wherein creator Mark Brown refers to this impressive stack of game boxes and cartridges as, quote,
every single mainline entry in the Super Mario Bros. Series.
And seriously, my compliments to Mark for actually having the guts to include Maker for 3DS here. I don't know if that's because he genuinely considers it to be a proper entry in the series, or as a re-release of the first Mario Maker, because, once again, his collection includes some, but not all remakes. Anyway, in the actual video outside this one shot, while he doesn't, say his list of games out loud at any point, he does seem to count Yoshi's Island as part of the series, which is always fun to see. There's also a very brief clip from Donkey Kong, which I don't think is meant to be an example of the game in the series, but who knows? You know what does include Donkey Kong as a game in the series is this 2016 video by IGN, which is a fully immersive VR experience of watching NES Mario hit blocks to display a timeline of Super Mario releases along the completely flat walls of a big cube. This timeline also includes the arcade game Mario Bros., Yoshi's Island, Maker, and Wario Land, but with the wrong number in its subtitle. Oops. Okay, one more. In 2022, VTuber Dollop Days did a 10-hour marathon stream with some friends commentating where she played through the Mario series, skipping to the next game whenever she died. And the final set of games she ended up playing for that stream is fascinating.
Not playing Paper Mario. I mean, that's... I would love to, but I think that needs its own stream. this count as a mainline Mario game?
I think so.
Yes, I watched the entire 10-hour stream while taking notes explicitly so I could figure out how one of my favorite streamers conceptualizes the Super Mario series. It was absolutely worth it. Now, this isn't necessarily representative of what games Dollop considers mainline. She does explicitly say in the stream that she's skipping games that she doesn't have means of playing, and that she doesn't consider Super Mario Kart to really be part of the series.
Should we have a moment of levity and play some Super Mario Kart? This is not a mainline game. I know it's not. This isn't canon. This is levity.
But she definitely considers Yoshi's Island to be mainline, and possibly also Donkey Kong. It's unclear.
Wait a minute. Is the original Donkey Kong? Is the original Donkey Kong? So I want to play that one. That's a Mario game. Oh, this is a separate timeline though, so it doesn't matter that it's out of order.
Oh, and while Days never lists all the games she considers mainline but isn't playing, she does specifically mention Bowser's Fury and Maker 2 as games she would have played if she owned them. She also sets up her Wii U with the intention of playing 3D World, but then can't find her copy, and then tries to play Super Mario Maker instead and can't get the game to work. It's very sad. So what point am I trying to make here? I'm not trying to, call any of these people out for disagreeing with each other about what games are in this series. In fact, I think it's beautiful in the sense that all these competing analyses of this series coexist. I'm all too aware that the internet does not need any more pointless debates over frivolous topics. I'm really just trying to demonstrate that the disagreement about what games are in this series, exists out in the wild and isn't just an artifact of my weird survey. And yes, the survey itself, as it did last time, indicates that there is no consensus. That has not changed. However, it's worth noting that it was considerably closer to a consensus than it was the first time around. The most common response to the 2021 survey was one particular list of 18 games. However, that list was only given by 1.25% of survey respondents. Almost 99% of people answered with something else. For the 2023 survey, well, since there were more options for each game than just yes or no, extracting each respondent's personal list of mainline Super Mario games from their answers was a little bit more involved than last time. The way I've decided to count it is that if someone counts a game as part of the series, then they probably will have said it's a mainline Super Mario game to the question that asks them to categorize it, and yes to the question that asks if it's a distinct entry in the Super Mario series. So their personal list of games should be the set of games where they answered in that specific way to both questions. I hope that makes sense. Right, the bottom line here is that the most common list of games was this list of 19 games, which is the same list as last time, but with Mario Wonder at the end. That is to say, Mario 1, both Mario 2s, 3, Land, World, Land 2, 64, Sunshine, New Soup, Galaxy, New Soup Wii, Galaxy 2, 3D Land, New Soup 2, New Soup U, 3D World, Odyssey, and Wonder. No surprises there, that's exactly what I expected. However, this particular list represents a whopping 5.7% of survey respondents. It's still a very small portion of the sampled population, but it's crossed the 5% threshold. The probability of a random person who filled out this survey agreeing with this exact list of 19 games is slightly higher than rolling a nat 20, but that's not the most striking difference between the results of the two surveys. That would be how the sheer size of the data is a whole order of magnitude larger in the newer survey. But the next most noticeable thing after that can be seen by looking at the series inclusion rates of each game individually. And what I mean by inclusion rate here is the percentage of people who included a specific game as mainline and distinct of the people who said something other than unsure. So you can see on this summary table for the results for Super Mario Bros. Wonder that the inclusion rate here is slightly higher than the total percentage of participants who called it mainline and distinct. In the 2021 survey, there was a relatively smooth gradient from the games most people considered part of the series to the games most people considered not part of the series. There's a few somewhat noticeable jumps here and there, but that's to be expected. If you compare that to the results of the 2023 survey, it is drastically different. Here, I'll cut out the ones that basically nobody included so you can see it more clearly. Look, there's suddenly this huge gap between these 19 games and everything else. All 358 games were either included by over 80% of respondents or less than 50%. There was nothing at all between those two things. That is a night and day, undeniable phase transition between these two sets of games. So how did this happen? Why is this difference so pronounced? I can think of several possible factors, which I'll quickly summarize. First of all, the existence of the video How Many Super Mario Games Are There? The fact that I've already made a video about this subject and that it's one of my most popular videos means that the people who heard about this new survey that I made and were interested in participating in it are pretty likely to have already seen that video. And there's no way that wouldn't impact how they end up taking the survey. Not only do they have knowledge of other people's opinions that they otherwise wouldn't have had, they also have knowledge of what I personally mean by the question that they otherwise wouldn't have had. In particular, this could mean that even though the survey asked people to give their personal opinions, someone who doesn't have a personal opinion on a particular game's status in the series but does have some knowledge of what other people think is pretty likely to want to conform to that understanding, trying to answer the questions correctly. The other potential factors are caused by the survey itself. The fact that there are more possible classifications to choose from for each game means that for games where no consensus exists, you would expect the percentage of people choosing each individual option to be lower, thus making the divide between games where consensus exists and games where consensus does not exist much more substantial. The presence of these additional options could also mean that in some cases, people who would have called a game mainline if mainline and spin-off were the only choices instead find that one of these new options describes their opinion better. It could also simply be that just seeing more games itself changes the way people think about them. Perhaps some people who would have called Yoshi's Island mainline when it was the only Yoshi game being asked about would then change their mind about it after seeing all the other Yoshi games on the list. The real cause was almost certainly a combination of all of these factors. And honestly, I just think it's really interesting that this massive difference in the data happened at all. Oh, and just to reiterate, the fact that the survey indicated that there is a clear consensus for each of these 19 games individually does not mean that this list of games is the consensus for what the Super Mario series consists of. Almost everyone who took the survey disagrees with this list in some way. They either think this list is incomplete, or some of these games shouldn't count, or they're just unsure about some of these. Here's a histogram showing the distribution of how many games people's lists included. The peak of the distribution is at 19 games, but it's not a very steep peak. There were almost as many people who included 20 games as there were who included 19 games. Additionally, this specific list of 19 games only accounts for about half of the participants whose lists were 19 games long. Even among people who agreed that there are exactly 19 mainline games, this list was still not an actual majority opinion. You might notice the distribution here is somewhat lopsided. The left side of the curve drops off a little bit faster than the right side. The median value isn't 19 games, it's 21 games. And while I'm at it, the mean value is a little under 24.5 games. I don't think taking the mean is that useful in this case, however. What you're not seeing on this histogram is the region I've cut off to the right, counting lists with considerably more games. While this part of the chart is pretty flat, there's still quite a few survey respondents that gave numbers of mainline games as high as 10 times the median, so that skews the mean value upwards quite a bit. Just for good measure, I might as well zoom out all the way on the vertical axis here too. The peak of the distribution still doesn't come anywhere close to being an actual majority. Oh, these different averages are why the number in the thumbnail is around 20-ish, by the way. The most common answer is 19, but the median answer is 21. But either way, it's around 20-ish games. Anyway, the strength and divide between these 19 games and everything else still had some significant side effects, even if it wasn't enough to actually create a total consensus. See, earlier I said that Super Mario Bros. Wonder is unambiguously a mainline game according to the survey results. However, Wonder is not the only game on the survey outside of Mario 1, 3, and World that passed this threshold, because just barely over 95% of participants said that Super Mario 64 is mainline. In fact, if you don't ignore the unsures, Mario 64's inclusion rate is even higher than Mario Wonder. According to this new survey, there are 5 games that basically everyone agrees are in this series: Mario 1, 3, World, 64, and Wonder. And that changes everything! This seriously throws a wrench into my whole analysis from part 1. I just kind of assumed that a small but statistically significant number of people categorically exclude all the 3D Mario games on the set. They'd say the mainline games are only the 2D platformers and the 3D platformers are something else. But if over 95% of people individually consider Super Mario 64 to be mainline, that can't be the only thing going on here. I think for the galaxies and 3D places, it's the reasons I went over in part 1. For both of these pairs, the two games are more similar to each other than they are to the rest of the series, so some people, but not many, think of them as their own thing. What the heck is going on with Sunshine and Odyssey? Why would anyone consider Mario 64 mainline but neither of these games? I guess both of these games did change a lot about the Mario formula, but they are way more similar to Mario 64 than 64 is to literally anything that came before it. However, this isn't really that significant. This inconsistency could just be random noise. Speaking of which, a lot of people who saw part 1 were curious about why exactly the number of people who said Mario 1 is mainline wasn't 100%. What on earth is Super Mario Bros. If it isn't a Super Mario game? And thanks to the increased number of options people could give for each game, I can now actually check instead of needing to speculate. So, 98.5% of survey participants said that Super Mario Bros. Is a mainline Super Mario game and a distinct entry in the series. And just about 1% said that it's a mainline Super Mario game, but not a distinct entry in the series. And by reading through the other answers given by people who classified Mario 1 in this way, including where I asked them directly to explain their reasoning, I can figure out what people meant by this. A handful of people suggested that Mario 1 used to be an entry in the series, but that it's since been supplanted by one of its many reissues, like All-Stars or Deluxe. However, a much more common thing, even outside of the small group who classified Mario 1 in this way, was people who expressed confusion about what exactly I meant by distinct entry. And yeah, that's fair. I was deliberately vague in the survey when I described all the categories, because the whole point of the survey was to see what people think the categories mean in the first place. But if someone taking the survey doesn't have a thing that they think distinct entry in the Super Mario series means, and I go out of my way to not tell them what I think it means, then yeah, they're probably just going to be confused. And since people don't like skipping questions, instead of saying they're unsure because they don't know what I mean by distinct entry, they felt obligated to figure out what I meant by distinct entry. But since I purposefully didn't tell them because because I really just want to know what they think it means, they ended up becoming frustrated by the whole experience. And that is entirely my fault, so I would like to apologize to everyone who felt that way taking this survey. In retrospect, I should have made it more clear that you're supposed to say unsure for any question you don't know how to interpret. Anyway, of the people who said Mario 1 is mainline but not distinct, most of them seem to have interpreted distinct as meaning distinctive, as in, does this game particularly stand out? And under that interpretation, it's quite reasonable to say that Mario 1 isn't distinct. After all, just about every single aspect of this game has been reused countless times in every other corner of the franchise. Therefore, it is a mainline Super Mario game, but not a distinct entry in the Super Mario series. This is pretty different from how most people taking the survey interpreted the distinct entry question, which was more like, if you were to make a list of games in the Super Mario series, would you count this game separately? Most people used mainline but not distinct to mean, yes, this is a mainline Super Mario game, but that's only because it's the same game as something else that came before it. Anyway, fans of arithmetic might have noticed that we still haven't accounted for everyone in this overly detailed analysis of the least ambiguous game in the series. 98.5% said that it's a mainline distinct entry, and 1% said that it's mainline but not distinct. But what about the other 0.5%? What do they think this game is? Yeah, it's only 0.5%, but that's not no one. This was a really big survey, so 0.5% of participants is still a couple dozen people who said that Super Mario Bros. Is not a mainline Super Mario game. Well, about half of that 0.5% said they're unsure about this game, and judging from what people in this group said about their reasoning, they were mostly just confused by the question, which is fair enough, so that leaves another 0.25%. And I am happy to report that most of them said it's not a Mario game. I think it's safe to characterize this group as jokesters. I have to hand it to them, it's a pretty good bit to claim that you don't think Mario 1 is a Mario game. It is a simple, unavoidable fact of internet surveys that you are going to get goofs. But mostly it's reassuring that so few people said this. A dozen or so people not taking the survey seriously out of 5,500 is a pretty good ratio. That definitely makes me more confident that these results are meaningful. On the other hand, that 1% who called Mario 1 mainline but not distinct probably shouldn't be dismissed. If this many people used mainline but not distinct to mean mainline but not distinctive, then the method I described before for extracting someone's personal list of games from their survey results isn't going to be completely reliable, and I don't have a solution to that. These competing interpretations make analyzing the data from the survey a little bit messier, but fortunately, I love nuance, so I don't think that's a problem. Regardless, the distinctive interpretation really was only used by a very small portion of participants. 91.5% of people said that the 3DS game New Super Mario Bros. 2 is a distinct entry in the Super Mario series, and I refuse to believe that any significant fraction of those people were trying to say that this specific game has something distinctive that sets it apart from the rest of the series. Speaking of New Soup 2, you might recall from Part 1 that New Soup 2 was considered mainline more often than New Soup DS, which was really weird. This time around, that discrepancy is completely gone. I am now very confident that the strange results for the New Soup games in the original survey were merely an artifact of the way that survey was formatted. Some people who otherwise would have included New Soup 1 didn't because they didn't recognize what game New Super Mario Bros. DS was referring to. In the updated survey, where for every single game I included the box art, system, year of release, and a link to the Super Mario Wiki for more information, the risk of people being confused about which game they're being asked to categorize was all but eliminated. Now at this point you're probably wondering, or even Super Mario Bros.
Your word is formaldehyde.
Can you use it in a sentence?
As you're sitting in your basement, you hit your vape, but then your mom walks.
Now at this point you're probably wondering, or even Super Mario Bros. Wondering, are they going to spend this whole video listing wildly interesting results from that survey? And I promise I do have an actual point that I'm building towards. It's just that I spent half a year gathering this data, and during that time I've been slowly accumulating thoughts and observations about both the data itself and the way I chose to collect it. So let's see, what else was weird about the results of the 2021 survey? Oh right, if you've been pausing this video to carefully read over all the big tables of spreadsheet data I've been showing, and also have a perfect memory of my previous video on this subject, then you've probably noticed one notable game that was present in the original survey that's absent from these charts. To recap, in that video I had a hard time figuring out how to interpret the way people classified Bowser's Fury. Since Bowser's Fury only exists as part of the bundle Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, the thing it even means to ask if it's a Super Mario game is completely different than it is for all the other games where it's ambiguous if they're in the series. Like, you can imagine someone where if they were to make a list of games in the Super Mario series, they'd include Bowser's Fury on that list, but if you ask them directly, is Bowser's Fury a mainline Super Mario game, they'd say no, because it doesn't exist as a standalone game. Conversely, you can imagine someone who doesn't consider Bowser's Fury to be part of the series, but if you ask them, is Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury a distinct entry in the series, they'd say yes, because 3D World is a mainline Super Mario game, and this game is a port of Super Mario 3D World, but with enough changes to make it distinct. So due to this complexity, I had literally no idea what the data for Bowser's Fury in the original survey implied. I spent a very long time thinking over what I could have done differently recently what the best way to ask about Bowser's Fury would have been until finally in 2023 with the new survey I still didn't have the answer, so I just didn't include Bowser's Fury. Now, I did still include Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, don't worry. In fact, this time around, this was the game closest to 50% inclusion, not Yoshi's Island. And a lot of people did go out of their way to tell me explicitly what they think about specifically Bowser's Fury, which is very helpful. I can't really use this for data, since, this only covers the portion of respondents who have a strong enough opinion on Bowser's Fury to tell me about it unprompted, but it's helpful nonetheless. So, right, despite my best efforts, I could not think of a way to ask about Bowser's Fury where I would be able to interpret what the results mean. If I included a paragraph of text explaining in precise detail what exactly it is that I'm trying to ask, a lot of people definitely wouldn't read it, because in order to get that far into the survey, they've already had to classify hundreds of other Mario games, so they'll be exhausted by that. I could have shuffled the order of the questions to mitigate those effects, but I'm asking 2 questions about each game, and Google Forms doesn't have a way to shuffle the question order while keeping pairs of questions next to each other like this. I do not recommend using Google Forms for anyone else who wants to make a big survey like this. It is the incorrect tool for this purpose. I could have also made the survey not take as long by grouping some of the games together instead of asking about all 358 one at a time, but that would have introduced massive bias into the results. If someone tells me they consider every Mario Kart game to be a major spin-off, how am I supposed to know what games they consider Mario Kart games? Sure, I can probably assume they're talking about games like Mario Kart DS, Mario Kart Wii, and Mario Kart Wii, but are they including Mario Kart Tour, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, Mario Kart Arcade GP, Super Mario Race, Famicom Grand Prix 2, 3D Hot Rally? The only way to know for sure is to ask about every game individually. I could have made special categories for just Bowser's Fury, but I could not justify to myself doing that for Bowser's Fury without doing the same thing for every single other game included as a side note or sub-game of some other release. And that's a problem, because if I asked people to classify every single WarioWare micro game, nobody would ever complete the survey. So unfortunately, I don't have data for Bowser's Fury this time. Around 47% of participants said 3D World plus Bowser's Fury is a mainline and distinct game in the Super Mario series, and I have no idea what that implies about Bowser's Fury by itself. However, someone else can make that video. Now, just because 3D World plus Bowser's Fury is the closest to 50%, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most ambitious.